Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We have a presentation by Evanique on Mary, Peter, and John. Really looking forward to this. So Evanique, take it away.
So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. So a little bit about how this started. Of course, this started with Sherry Kant. We were talking one day, I think it was before one of the Stoicism meetups, and Sherry Kant was telling me about this book that he was reading. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sherry Kant, but I think it was called The Handmaid of the Lord.
Yes.
And he was telling me about, what he was discovering about Mary. And then he was talking about also Peter and also John, and how Peter was a man of action and John was the one that understood God, and Mary was the one that gave physical life to God. And so I was like, that's so interesting. And then I texted him and I was like, well, I think we should do this as a meetup. And at the time I had no idea what I was going to do or how it was going to work. But I was like, the only way I think is to just do it and see what happens. So that's kind of what this is tonight. So when I was researching, I was taken aback at the lives of these three people. So I was telling Sharika earlier that I think I kind of want to do a deeper dive into their lives. So tonight is presented as a kind of introduction. Um, this is meant to be a presentation that is not 100% biblically based. And what I mean by that is that when I did research, different speakers were talking about, they had went like um one of the sites that I used was For Our Daily Bread. And what they do is they have a series where they go into modern day Jerusalem, modern day Galilee, um, modern day Bethlehem, where these stories started, and they show you different areas. It's a YouTube video, and they show you different areas, and they show you where certain events happen. And what they do is they explain the culture, like the background. So it's biblically based, but tonight's presentation I'm going to be doing mostly talking. It's going to be about the background of these figures, Mary, Peter, and John, and where they lived and how they lived and the culture behind it, so that it gives you a better understanding of how they appeared in the Bible and why. And I want this to kind of be an interactive presentation. So I don't know, Sharika, how do you want to do it? Do you want to do it after each slide, or do you just want me to present? And
I think we should have multiple slides. Maybe we'll have a place in the middle. Is there a place in the middle?
Well, it's not a big presentation itself. It's only like 4
Okay,
slides.
then the best thing is to just run through the entire presentation and then have just a back and forth, because then that'll give you a chance to present everything that you have researched, and people can start with that.
Okay. So I will jump in and begin, and I'm going to start with Mary. And at first I was thinking Mary, doing the presentation, as she gave physical life to Christ, and she did. But when I was doing my research, when I looked back on it, one of the speakers in the Our Daily Bread website said that Mary was the beginning of the gospel. And I said to myself, that's a very interesting thing to explore. And I was like, how is Mary the beginning? And then it made sense, because Mary gave birth to Jesus, and Jesus is the good news. And so, in addition to Mary giving physical birth to Jesus and giving him a physical life, um, she was also the beginning of the gospel. And the thing is that the first thing that Mary had to do when presented was say yes to Gabriel and say yes to becoming, in a sense, a single mother in Jerusalem at a time where, it not only was it frowned upon to be pregnant out of wedlock, but it could cause your death. If a woman was pregnant outside of wedlock, that woman could be brought to the center of town, and the priest could force her to drink a a drink that was mixed with bitter herbs and in some senses like almost like a poison, and then the priest would read curses. And this is in Numbers 5. um I sorry, I should have put the reference in, but it was in Numbers 5:21. And the priest would say this kind of prayer slash curse. And if the woman wasn't guilty of anything, um, then it was thought that, nothing would happen. But if the woman was guilty, it would be these bitter herbs. And I think what they did is they burned the curses, and then they forced the woman to swallow it with this drink. And if the woman couldn't take it, then she died. But if the woman was not guilty, she lived. And so that was a risk for Mary. Not only that, being brought to in the middle and being, humiliated, when she was taking on becoming pregnant, she had to tell Joseph that this is what's going on. And seeing as that she had to tell Joseph, Joseph at first did not believe her, of course, you know, but he decided that he was not going to bring her into the center of town, that he was going to divorce her quietly because he knew um, the consequences of doing that, of doing it the other way and bringing her into center. So he was going to do it quietly as to not embarrass Mary. But then an angel came to him and said that she is in fact carrying, you know, the Son of God. So now Joseph had to, he chose to marry Mary, but he had to also go through, being ridiculed by his friends, his family, to them saying that, either they thought he was gullible and for believing this, or, you know, they thought he was crazy for living with the shame of Mary carrying another man's child, and he was going to stick with her behind it. Um, so then, after that, not only that, but now she has to raise the Son of God. But then what they go into, and this is how we get to the beginning of the Mary being the beginning of the gospel, is that after Jesus died, Mary had to tell, or even probably during his life, Mary had to tell about Jesus's early life. Remember, Jesus was a baby. She had to tell the stories of, for instance, where he was lost 3 days, and neither her nor Joseph knew where they were. And so one of the things they bring up is like, how do you not know where your baby is? Well, at that time, um, you know, it was a pilgrimage of a whole bunch of people, and they were with family. So both sides thought that, Jesus was with the other children, with family members, and that they were in the crowd. And what they don't say is that, Mary and Joseph really had to look for him for 3 days. They had to go back and look for him. And then Jesus is saying, do you not know where I am? Of course, I was in my Father's house. And one of the speakers so eloquently said it is like, at that moment, Mary probably contemplated killing Jesus after finding him after 3 days. But, she kept that on her heart. And, um, when she was stand, when she was standing at the cross, she remembered that. And she remembered that he's going back to his Father. But she didn't understand it then, and she didn't understand it now. And one of the things is that that I plan on exploring about Mary in her life is that, there's a lot of cultural things behind it. And just one more thing really quick before I move on is that the birth of Jesus, for instance, everybody thinks he was born in a manger, which is like outside in the elements with all these animals, and they're outside. But in reality, in that time, the houses had the animals in the house, and they were at a lower level. So Jesus was actually born in a house, and he was surrounded by animals. The common thing is that there was no room at the end, and they said that's probably not true, because most likely during that time she would have been with family. and the family would have let them stay in the house because I think, oh, I forget what holiday it was, but this is the thing that I wanted to explore because I was like, there's so much richness behind Mary's life that we don't know, and we all know Mary from the perspective of Jesus. We never. When I was doing this research and I was, looking up things about Mary, there were so many speakers talking about Mary from the aspect of Mary and what she went through and her view and her perspective, and how she had to go through Jesus's life. So that is the beginning, Mary being the beginning of the gospel. And the next slide I'm going to go to is about John.
Let
And
us do one thing, Evanik. I think I like your idea. Let's go back to Mary's slide.
okay.
And let's talk about Mary a little bit. So we'll talk about each of them separately. We'll have kind of detailed discussion. So we can stop sharing. We can have direct. Okay. So I'm going to make some comments about Mary, and then anybody who wants is welcome. Can you tell, Evanik, can you just give an overview of the structure of your presentation? So there is how many slides and what do they cover?
So there's 4 slides. The first one that we just read off is Mary. The second one will cover John. And then the third one, which I was not expecting until I did the research, is the third and fourth one are going to cover Peter, a man of action. And that one is the one that gets really interesting because, again, we know the story of Peter, but do we really understand the story of
Wonderful.
Peter?
Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. So people have an idea of the structure now. So we'll do Mary discussion, John discussion, both slides of Peter and discussion. Okay. And then final discussion. All right. So can I make some comments? They are a little bit lengthy. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's what I want. I want it to be interactive. So please.
So, again, my understanding of Bible is very, very, little. This is new to me. I've not spent much time. This is only about 1.5 years. I do not have the entire context here of the culture and how it is lived. So I'm speaking with very little base here. Okay. I want to highlight 2 thinkers. Okay. One is Adrienne von Spire. Her book on Mary is the best thing that I've found so far on Mary. It's called Handmaid of the Lord. Okay, and I'm going to read to you just the first paragraph, which will give you some idea of, the power of her writing. And then secondly, I'm going to talk to you about one chapter from Romano Guardini's book called Jesus Christus. It's a beautiful book. It's a short list of actually sermons on different aspects of Jesus, and it starts off with Mary. So I'm going to give you like an overview of that entire chapter. There's 7 key points in Mary's life as a base to kind of think about Mary. So first, let's start with Adrienne. I'm going to read a paragraph. As a sheaf of grain is tied together in the middle. Give me just a second. So as a sheaf of grain is tied together in the middle and spreads out at either end, so Mary's life is bound together by her assent. So the core idea through this entire book of Adrienne is assent, saying yes of Mary. This single, all-encompassing act accompanies her at every moment of her existence, illuminates every turning point of her life, bestows upon every situation its own particular meaning, and in all situations gives Mary herself the grace of renewed understanding. Her assent gives full meaning to every breath, every movement, every prayer of the Mother of God. This is the nature of an assent. It binds the one who gives it. Yet, it allows him complete freedom in shaping its expression. I'll read that sentence again. This is the nature of assent. It binds the one who gives it. Yet it allows him complete freedom in shaping its expression. He fills his assent with his personality, giving it its weight and unique coloring. But he himself is also molded, liberated, and fulfilled by his assent. All freedom develops through surrender and through renunciation of liberty. And from this freedom within commitment, there arises every sort of fruitfulness. I'll read the last two sentences again. All freedom develops through surrender and through renunciation of liberty. And from this freedom within commitment, there arises every sort of fruitfulness. So what she's saying is that when you say yes to reality, to nature, to God, you're committing yourself, you're binding yourself, but you're binding yourself to a universal principle. You're taking in a seed of the universe itself, from which there is a tremendous range of things that you can produce. So on one hand, it is one specific thing, but because it is universal, it allows you to create things. And in every new context, what you create is different. So now let's jump to Guardini's chapter on Mary. This is the first chapter of his book, Jesus Christus. He says, if you want to understand Mary, he says, if you want to understand Jesus, you have to first understand Mary. And understanding Mary is a lot easier than understanding Jesus, as Mary herself will tell you. There are 7 key points in the life of Mary that he talks about. And you can see how this idea of assent applies across the board to each of them. First, when the angel shows up, she says yes. She says yes, not knowing what is actually going to happen. She doesn't know what it means to give birth to a God. Yes, yet she says yes. It's point number 1. Point number 2, she's willing to accept. She's willing to accept everything that will happen with Joseph. She's not thinking of that when she gives the assent. She just says yes to God. She has to deal with Joseph, as Evanique pointed out. There is a lot of risk there in that culture, in that times. She undertakes that. Third point, she leaves and goes to Egypt, leaving behind a comfortable life. She's willing to take all pains for this child. Now, Jesus' life is interesting. It's like there is a little bit in the beginning, then there is almost nothing, then there is age of 12, then there is almost nothing, and then there is age of 30. So at the age of 12, we have this incident of him disappearing and going to the temple, and then asking her, why were you looking for me? Now, the way in which some of the gospels say it, is that she heard those words and kept them in her heart. She did not understand exactly how come, because, a mother is going to be distraught at her child leaving like that. But her son is telling her something, and she takes that in. So though she does not understand, she holds it in her heart. Then there is the start of his ministry. He's going around to these strange people, all kinds of people. He talks to tax collectors and prostitutes and Samaritans of all people, just going around. And there is a tremendous amount of opposition to him, and she's worried. So she goes to where he's preaching, and people tell him, your mother is here. And what is his answer? Ones who follow the word of my Father are my mother and brothers. Again, imagine what that means to a mother. He's saying, look, this is a greater family that I am committed to. Again, she takes that. She's there at the foot of the cross. We think of the agony of Jesus, but imagine the agony of Mary. And she does that willingly. She accepts that willingly. Again, she doesn't understand why this needs to be. She doesn't have the full context. But unlike Peter, who says, you shall never do that, she is there. And she says yes to even that. And then only with Pentecost, and a fuller understanding of that comes to her, like it comes to everybody else, including everybody afterwards. So those are the 7 stages. So that's what I wanted to share with you. So folks, now I want to open it up for comments. What do you think about Mary? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark with any comments you have about Mary, the nature of Mary.
Just one thing I wanted to add while people are lining up, Shrikant. On your second part, when you said, when you're talking about, Mary saying yes and not knowing what that's going to fully entail. And especially with Joseph, and I was thinking, I was thinking of like the faith of Mary to accept that, to believe that she is seeing an angel, based on what she's learned, and to have that faith. And I always wonder, did she feel it in her heart even then? Even like you said, she didn't even know fully what she was saying yes to. Mary at the time is around 13 or 14 years old. And, she's just coming out of childhood, entering into womanhood. And she's being asked, not like, even though she's engaged and she knows someday she will be a mother, but just to be walking down the street and be pregnant is a different animal. And so the faith, and it's symbolic of the faith that we're asked to say yes to. Like you were saying in others gospels, you have to say yes. And you have to ask and you have to say yes. And you don't know what's coming forward after that. And it's indicative of what all of the disciples are about to go through, even though they don't know it yet either, that they're about to say yes to something and they're not going to know what's coming next. So just to add that in.
Wonderful. That's beautiful point. I'm sorry I did not make it and you made it. That's fantastic. What I want to say is that, what she epitomizes is love, and faith. Think of a mother-child relationship. right? A mother puts so much of herself in her child. Does she really know what he's going to turn out to be? No, but she has the love and she has the faith in the child. And that specific quality of love combined with faith and hope. So this is the entire of Christian, unique Christian virtues that are being captured here in very simple actions. There aren't that many actions of Mary in the gospel. It's very, very, very little, but all of them count. And I think the best portrayal of Mary I have is, of course, Michelangelo's Pieta. You can see the whole thing. You can see the love. You can see the serenity. You can see the acceptance. You can see the sorrow. You can see the grace. It's all there. And that's what she epitomizes. All right, would love to hear what anybody thinks. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Let's start with, give me just a second. I'm going to unmute everybody. Go ahead, Katie.
Well, I'm thinking in my mind, she must have felt kind of a mix of emotions when she was given this, huge honor to bear God's child in a lot of fear. Fear at the same time, and I'm glad that we're going through this because it's a great foreshadowing for Jesus, for how he, when he comes into the world, he at first is not accepted.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's see, Gary, are you in a place where you can talk about your thoughts about Mary before we go on? We've just discussed, just to give you a quick overview, we have just discussed Mary, and then we are going to now go to, Peter, etc. next. But any comments on Mary, Gary?
Did I miss Evanique's presentation?
Yes. But Evanique, can you bring up the slide for a second? His mind is very fast. You can just read the slide and you would be able to get the gist of it. Evanique, can you do like a 1-minute version of your presentation? Bring up the slide and do a 1-minute presentation.
I'm on mute. I'm gonna bring it up right now. So Gary, just a really quick 30-second kind of, so basically, Mary is the beginning of the gospel, because Mary had to say yes to Gabriel. Mary had to carry Jesus in the womb and bring Jesus into the world in physical form. And then Mary also had to tell the story of the beginning of Jesus's life to the disciples, because the disciples would not have known that without Mary. So, and I was just talking about, the bravery of Mary carrying a child out of wedlock and what that brought on for her. And that it was just an act of faith for her to say yes to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Go ahead, Gary.
I was raised Roman Catholic and then became Protestant later. And so I'm schizophrenic in my attitudes about Mary. There's, of course, the Catholic tradition is very much, honoring. And then the Protestant tradition says that it's all idolatry. And so it's something that I still kind of wrestle with. It's interesting. I like what you brought up there, Evanique, on your slide. One of the things that popped in my head is that sometimes people criticize the gospel account because they see Mary as this vulnerable person, and what is she going to say to the angel, and so they just the whole situation there is like, did she really have a choice in the matter? But when you read like the Gospel of Luke, it looks like looks like she does, and that Gabriel is offering it to her, and she says, "Behold, I am the servant. Do to me as you will." And so that's the aspect in the Catholic tradition that they always focus on, is her willingness to embrace that. And it's when you were talking, when Shrikant, and when you brought it up just now, I was just thinking that that's in the Catholic tradition, that's what they focus on in the attitude that we all ought to have, is that willingness and trust that God has a plan, and he's brought us to be part of that plan, invited us to be part of that plan. And do we have that level of faith to just say, okay, I'll be part of that, you know? And so, yeah, Mary is held in like just very, very high regard for that unquestioningly, yes, I'll go ahead and do it. And then as soon as you become a Protestant, we stop talking about her entirely.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Gary. All right, Evanique, shall we go with John?
Sure. Just one note to what Gary said. I understand that too. Actually, Penny wants to say something. Just really quick though. I understand that because my mom's AME, African Methodist, and my dad is Catholic, and I was brought up in a Catholic school. So, but I think if you take out the whole idolatry part of it, just Mary herself as a woman is just amazing. I think Penny wanted to say something.
Penny, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I was raised Protestant, so of course it's funny because Mary certainly wasn't venerated, but I mean, we all know all those stories by heart because those are the typical biblical stories about Mary. But I think it's reflective of the attitude of the Jews, who were very male dominated, that even though Mary had such a key role, they kind of like ignored her and did not venerate other women in the same way, which perhaps they could have in a different society, because they could have said, look, I mean, this was the mother of God. So if there hadn't been a mother, we wouldn't have ever had Jesus. So, you know, women should really be put in high regard instead of kind of looked down on because of the other aspects of the religion. And I think there's probably few stories in the Bible, partly because of the fact that they were very male oriented. So they put the minimum in that they kind of had to, but there were probably other things that could have been said that were just left out about her. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny. Next up is Jeannie.
I wanted to ask, I thought she was the cousin of John the Baptist's mother. So I think that there was like a culture of, you know, religiosity in the family, perhaps, to raise the two of them, I would think.
Yeah, that is actually true. That was my understanding too, is that, you know, Mary's cousin Elizabeth actually gave birth to John the Baptist. And I'm trying to think, I want to say it's in Luke. In Luke, I think, where it talks about, you know, Mary goes to visit Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's baby, who is going to be John the Baptist, leaps in her womb when Mary comes in. And Elizabeth immediately knows that Mary is carrying the child of God, because John the Baptist is a few months older than Jesus. And yeah, so that is actually true, Jeannie. And yes, they are both from, you know, very Jewish backgrounds. So yeah, you have it totally correct, and you're right. There is a certain religiosity there in that family. And just to bring up the point of Penny is that I think this is why I think doing a study of Mary is so interesting, because we see her in the Bible as, like, the mother of Jesus, and there's nothing really much said about her, but people have researched like those cultures, and oh, it's in Luke, and thank you, Gary. Gary confirmed it for me. Um so yeah, so it is in Luke, and I think too, one of the things about Mary is why I want to cover her even more, is that I want to cover her as her own person, not just like the mother of Jesus, because she has so much depth. And like, people have explored what was going on in Mary's time, and they're giving light to what kind of woman Mary was. And remember, the Bible was the books that were included in the Bible were decided by the Nicene Council. So there are books that are not in the canonical Bible about Mary. So that's why I kind of want to explore a little more about her, so as a person. So thank you for that, Jeannie.
All right, let's go to John.
All right, I'm going to do this now. All right. So John, so we've talked about John in the book of John. So me and Sherry both agree that John is the one who understood. And one of the things is that he's the youngest of the group. So he's kind of like the baby, and he's the brother of James. And in our daily bread, it says that he was probably followed Jesus under the influence of Peter, because they were all fishermen together. And so, John being this young guy and Peter being the older guy, he probably looked up to Peter. John in the beginning was ambitious and hot-headed. And an example, he and his brother James wanted to be beside Jesus in the kingdom of heaven. And so they had their mother as Jesus, that she wanted her sons to sit one on the right and one on the left. And Jesus tells her, that is for my Father to decide. But as we see, when they're around Jesus, that changes. John in particular was present at transcendental moments of Jesus, along with James and Peter. And so Jesus allowed John to see and understand who he was, both as human and as divine. And John is the first apostle to recognize Jesus after the resurrection. He was the one that, Jesus put it on his heart to reveal. So I didn't do too much with John because we've studied John, but I just wanted to kind of bring this one in, and to say that he understood Jesus, or that he was the one who Jesus loved. I remember one of our meetups, and I think it was one of the ones that Gary was doing on the gospel. One of the speakers said that he was actually awed at how much Jesus loved him. And it's so funny because it seems like John and Peter are so different, or like we see them as different, but in reality, they were both zealous. They were both, had a little bit of arrogance about them, which you don't think about when John, but you could see what Jesus did to transform them and being around it. And I think even if you don't believe in the Bible, it's this thing of the universal principles again. You follow these, like all of these leaders have universal principles, and when you follow this, it changes you. It changes who you are. Jesus was about love, and what love truly meant, sacrificing for people, recognizing and not being arrogant, and not being prideful, and serving other people. That's what it was about. And really recognizing that you are not the center of the universe, even though we would all love to think that we are at some points in time. So like I said, I didn't go full on into John. I just wanted to cover this. But one of the things I think when talking about John is, if I were going to do a study on John as the person outside of Jesus, it would be really hard because John was so young when he started with Jesus, and we would just have to cover him as the fisherman before. And because John was the youngest one, that he had the most time to grow. But one of the things that they did bring up, and I think if I do the study of John, it would be after Jesus's death, because you know, he was the only one that wasn't martyred out of all of the apostles. And the question then becomes, why wasn't he martyred? It's not because they didn't try. There was a story that they tried to burn him in hot oil, and it didn't take, like, kind of like Daniel and the Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego in the Old Testament, in the fire. Like, they sent them through the fire and they came out on the other side. Like, there's a reason for that. And one of the things that they brought up is that John was the closest. Some scholars feel like John was closest to Jesus because he reclined on Jesus during the Last Supper. And somebody brought up, well, that could be true, or it could just be that he was the closest one at that time. Like, he was just closest in proximity, and he reclined, because you see, and when we go into Peter, so I'm going to stop in like 2 seconds, that Peter also had this tight relationship with Jesus. And there's, in a sense, like, all disciples had a different type of relationship with Jesus. It doesn't say that John is the one who Jesus loved the most. It just says he's the one who Jesus loved, and Jesus loved all the disciples. So just some of those things that I wanted to bring up. Like I said, I didn't go too much into it because I know we discussed John a lot in the meetups, but I would love to hear your thoughts. I see Jeannie's hand is raised, so.
Sounds good. Okay, if you can stop sharing, let's go to Jeannie next. Would love to hear. So folks, again, what we are trying to do is we're trying to see who these 3 people are. Who is Mary, who is John, and who's Peter?
So
go ahead.
John was the one that was told to take care of Mary. But why, since there were other sons that Mary had later, supposedly, why weren't they the ones that were going to take care of their own mother instead of John? I mean, unless, was he actually the brother of Jesus or something like that? Because Jesus did have other brothers. Was one of them named John? No. Okay.
It looks like you want to say something, Shrikant?
Yeah, so Mary was handed over to John, John of Gospel of John. So I have an answer to that, but I want to have everybody else talk about who is John, and then I will I'll make comments. All right, who would like to talk about who is John? What sets him apart? Okay. So Gary, do you want to say something about John?
I feel like I said so much about John in all of our previous
Do
lectures.
it now.
that
Do
I
it
don't-
now.
I don't want to bore
yeah.
you anymore.
No, please bore us. It is really, really exciting, kind of boring. So go ahead.
My favorite comment on who John is Shrikant's observation that that in the Gospel of John, when he refers to him as the one whom Jesus loved, that it's really the one who realized that Jesus loved him, and so we should be reading ourselves into that. Not that John is so special. What makes John special is his acknowledgement that Jesus loved him. And we should put ourselves in that position and have that same humble acknowledgement that we are also loved by Jesus. That is kind of important to me. And I think I brought up also is that, John, I think it's important that he is loved by Jesus. And then when it describes him at the Last Supper as being in the bosom of Jesus, that's the same language that's used for Jesus being in the bosom of the Father in the beginning of the gospel. And so there's this intentional parallel kind of explaining how that same unity of relationship that Jesus enjoys with the Father is the relationship that we are invited to enjoy with Jesus. That closeness. And so that sticks out to me. And it's in the Gospel of John also, where Jesus, says, as he's on the cross, behold your son, and behold your mother, and he gives them to each other. So I think that there's definitely something, that unity and that sense, there's a sense of love that's in that position, as that transcends familial obligation or duty. And I don't know if this is where you were going in your answer, Shrikant. For me, there's this contrast between law and grace. The law says this is what you're supposed to do and what your obligations are. And as we make this transfer from law into grace, suddenly we're not doing things because we have to or because the law tells us to. We're acting out of grace. We're acting out of love. The same grace that Shrikant so frequently says rains down from heaven upon all of us, is we have this opportunity to be that grace towards other people, to just rain down grace and love on other people. So that's my attitude.
Wonderful, beautifully put, Gary. So Evanik, what I'm proposing to do is actually much better when we have all three people to, on the table. We can talk about natures of all the three together. So how about you talk about Peter, and then we will talk about all three of these folks.
Okay. Sure. Let's do that. Uh,
And Jeannie, I will answer your question, but I will answer it after this.
Okay, so we're gonna now talk about Peter, man of action. Of course, we know Peter as the zealous one, the one that acts now, thinks later. Peter, formerly known as Simon, was a follower of John the Baptist. And there's something important about the simple fact that he was named Simon. That means he was part of the Jewish sect called the Maccabees, and they were kind of the people that wanted revolution. They wanted freedom from the Roman Empire. And, that Peter, Simon, well, I'll just say Peter, but, at that time he was named Simon. The simple fact he was attracted to John the Baptist because John the Baptist was like this alternative person, and that, he was kind of like against the establishment. And, the Maccabees were responsible for a revolution that happened previously. So that was what Peter was raised in. So he was kind of like ready to go, and he was, for John the Baptist, and, so that's where he starts. He is portrayed as the most human disciple. And, because Peter has all his follies and all his faults. And, he just kind of lets it go. Like, this is who I am. But the thing is that Peter grows, right? And Peter becomes the rock. Jesus actually names him Peter because he knows that Peter's going to be the rock that his church stands on, that the church itself stands on. One of the things that Peter had to accept, like this is like part of his humanity, is that, and Jesus had to help him accept it, is that the Gentiles were going to be a part of the kingdom of God. When Jesus goes to this town and he is casting out the pigs, he is casting out the demon into the pigs. This is not a Jewish community. This is a Gentile community. Think about it. They're herding pigs. Like, no Jewish man would be herding pigs because it's an unclean animal. And, they're probably thinking like Peter is probably thinking, why are we here? What are we doing? Like, Jesus, what? So he had to kind of like overcome that bias of himself, but it's real. And that's Peter. But in the end, Peter becomes the most humble. Because think about it, how do you know about these stories, right? Some disciples may have observed them, but it is commonly known that Peter tells I want to say it's Luke. No, sorry, Mark. I had it here. Thank goodness. He told those stories to Mark without concern about his reputation, which is why Mark can write about them. Peter's like, yeah, this is who I am. This is who I was. This is who I grew to be. So and you see the biggest transformation, I think, which I didn't really appreciate before studying Peter as a person, that he undergoes one of the biggest transformations out of all of the disciples. He had to overcome his biases. He had to overcome his zealousness. He had to overcome this fight in him in order to become the man of God that he is, so that he could lead the church, that he could be the rock of the church. He had to go through all that. And I think that's just very profound, and that makes Peter very profound. I hate to say it, but for me, Peter almost becomes like a joke, kind of like, oh, he's the zealous guy, he's the idiot, he's going to do it. But really, he acts, not only in zealousness, not only because he's kind of like a warrior, but he also acts on faith. You see it when he goes out on the water. Like, people are like, Peter lost faith and fell in, but Peter was the only one that had the faith out of all of the disciples to step out on that water. So, that man of action, I think, is key. And I think, for universal principles, for me, I think, we can have all these values and all these virtues, but if we don't act upon them, it's nothing. And, if we don't, like, in the Bible, in James, it says faith without works is dead. So Peter has the faith and Peter has the works, and the works is the action. You need that both to have true faith. So, Peter is that person. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about Peter and Gethsemane. And, we always talk about the denial of Jesus, that Jesus tells him at the Last Supper that, Peter, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter is like, I will never do that. And then we see that Peter does that, and that's what is focused on. And then, but remember that in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter fought for Jesus. He cut the Roman soldier's ear off. And then Jesus goes and not only rebukes Peter, but then healed the man that Peter fought for. He was fighting for Jesus. In Peter's mind, he was fighting for Jesus. And then Jesus goes and heals the guy. And, Peter was upset because he wanted Jesus to take action. He wanted to see, the angels come down from heaven and save him. He wanted Jesus not to go to that cross. That's what he wanted. And that's what he meant when he said, I'm going to fight for you. Like, I will fight for you. I will die for you. That's what that meant. Like, I will fight for you not to go to that cross, which was not Jesus's path. So when Jesus not only didn't take action, didn't fight back, but actually healed the person that was taking him to the cross, that was a lot for Peter. And then Peter still sticks by him, even though he runs after that. He does go to the courtyard where, Jesus is being taken. But then, of course, he's recognized, and, he curses and says, I don't know the damn man. Like, he just says, I don't know him. And by the 3rd time, he really doesn't know him. And then the rooster crows and he weeps. And, it begs the question of what, and just want people to think about it. Which Jesus was Peter willing to fight for? Was he willing to fight for the Jesus that was going to the cross? Or was he willing to fight for the Jesus that was going to bring down the 10,000 angels and save Jerusalem? And what Peter did not understand at the time is that Jesus was talking about spiritually saving people. He still didn't fully grasp at that. But after this, and after being forgiven by Jesus and they call it the reinstatement, when he appears to the disciples and they're on the beach and they're fishing, and he tells them to, hey, guys, why don't you get the fish from the other side? And Peter realizing that it's Jesus, like takes off his shirt and like runs to him. And, like while they're eating and sharing a meal, that's when Jesus reinstates Peter. And that's when Peter understands what he's fighting for. And then, even after that, Peter still has to overcome some of his biases because he's in the Roman town and he won't eat the food. And he's hungry. And then there's an appearance and they're like, eat these unclean animals. And of course, the symbolism is that it's not about the food. It's about, you're going to preach to the Gentiles. You're going to preach in Rome. You're going to preach to people that are not Jewish. And for Peter, that's a lot to overcome because it was promised to the Jews. And in the Old Testament, it was promised to the Jews. So that is something that Peter had to overcome. And I think that's why I think Peter is one of the most compelling disciples. And I didn't appreciate that until I studied it. And he's one of the most compelling disciples because he has to me anyway, he has the biggest growth, the biggest transformation. And he's not ashamed to talk about it. And he's like, this is who I was, and this is who I am in Christ. And that's where he puts himself. So that's what I have.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. So I'm going to make a few comments here, and then we'll open it up for any questions. So now that we have all three on the table, it is really amazing to start comparing them, okay? And I have to use props. That's the only way I can think. So here is my prop. Okay, this is a tetrahedron, okay? This yellow is Jesus on the cross, okay? Imagine Jesus up there, okay? And who is at the foot of the cross? So in a very deep sense, you're always at the foot of the cross, looking up. Who is at the foot of the cross? There is love of Mary. There is the understanding of John, and there is the action-orientedness of Peter, but he's not there. He should be there, okay? So in that sense, the church is right there at the foot of the cross. You have three aspects. You have the aspect of action, which is characterized by Peter. You have the action of love, which is epitomized by Mary. And you have the aspect of understanding, captured by John. Now, just like Peter, most of us are kind of action-oriented. So churches become more action-oriented. And there isn't enough love and there isn't enough understanding. Certainly, understanding is the hardest one to bring in. So let's look at them now two at a time, okay? Let's look at these two. This is Peter, man of action, and this is John, okay? So let's just look at the stories of them to see if we can see the characteristics. So firstly, you have to understand from Jesus's point of view, he loves both Peter and John, and he does love Mary. Okay, so he is always, the grace is raining on all three of them. Okay, now Peter, he is a man of action, like all of us are. I mean, all of these are aspects of us. This is our potential to act, to conduct ourselves in the world. That is what Peter is capturing. Mary is capturing our capacity to love, to have faith in people. John is epitomizing our ability to understand. Okay, understand. Again, I love the word understand. So you're standing under reality, under God, under the universe. You are in that position. You are in awe of it. You have the humility of it. You have the love for it. All of it is captured by the word understanding. Now, let's look at Peter for a moment. Okay. So I want to highlight a few things of Peter. He's a man of action. Okay. Let's bring in Peter and sometimes John. So for example, after the resurrection, it is John who spots Jesus. And it is Peter who jumps into the water. John says to Peter, there is the Lord. And he immediately jumps into the water to go there. John is the one who reaches the grave first, but waits and lets Peter go in form of the chief priest. Because church is founded on Peter, on those actions, but it is guided by John, the understanding. And John's position is always kind of in the background. In a sense, he's a child, and in a sense, he's a wise man. And both of them are there in him. He's the one who's written the revelation. He's the one who lives the longest. And he writes even the Gospel of John at this ripe old age of having lived Christ over a lifetime, and that being part of him, and that flows out in beauty in him. Yet it maintains that childlike simplicity and beauty in every word. So you can see it in his writing, all three. In the Gospel of John, he's showing you the form of Jesus. In his letter, especially letter 1, the first letter, is the most simple, powerful, beautiful capturing of the moral. So it's the moral cause, the efficient cause of what you need to do. And then in Revelation, it's the final cause, the anagogical aspect. And he captures all three. So the level of his understanding is just off the charts. So he's closest to Jesus in so many different ways, in love, in understanding. In person, he's the closest to Jesus. And Jeannie asked the question, why does Jesus hand Mary to John? Because now it is about the foot of the cross is the church. The love has to be looked after by understanding. So the understanding and love have to go together. It is not about family anymore. It is about the church. It is about the community that Jesus is making possible when the Holy Spirit comes. So each person can have that love within them. So that's why it is basically showing that. Now, a couple of points about Peter. He's the one who's saying no to Jesus all the time. Okay, he says, oh no, you shall not go to the cross. And Jesus has to reprimand him, saying, get behind me, Satan. He's the one who is saying, no, don't, I'm not going to let you be taken. Again, he has to stop him. This happens many, 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 many times. He's saying, no, you shall not wash my feet. Okay, there, cross is the heart of who Jesus is. Washing of feet is heart of what Jesus is. And he's saying no to each of them. So he's denying Jesus. He's denying Jesus in so many different ways. And of course, there is the actual denial. But these denials that he has earlier are even deeper, because this is saying no to the meaning of Jesus, meaning of love in foot washing, meaning of rebirth in the cross. He's saying no to that. So the saying no to him in person pales in comparison with this other no. Yet, what it is showing is it's something profound, because again, I like to think of, this gospel, you have to put yourself in each character. You have to be, you are Peter. Okay, you will make mistakes. You will make mistakes. You will deny. You will say no to things that have to be done because they are hard. And yet, Jesus says, you are the rock, and hands over the church to Peter. Peter is a different man after Pentecost, because now he gets the Spirit, which is now accessible to everybody else. So that's my thoughts about Peter, but would love to hear any thoughts by anybody. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Evanik, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just like I love what you said about how Peter says no to Jesus and says no to Jesus. And I think one of the aspects is the heart of Peter, though, right? Like, so I think Jesus was very good at seeing people's hearts. And I think when he saw Peter's heart, he knew why Peter was saying no, no, no. And that's why he chose to work with Peter. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons why Peter is the most human disciple, right? Like, we are stubborn. Like, even with the best intentions, we're like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go there. Why do you want me to go to that neighborhood? Why do we, why do I have to do all these things? But in this mind of wanting to have the heart of Jesus. So Jesus works with us, just like he had to work with Peter and, tell him, this is the way we're going. And no, we're not going to do this your way, because we do want to do this our way. So I think Peter's that symbolism too of, let me do it my way. Like, I understand that you're here to save everybody, but you don't have to go to the cross to do that. We can fight for you. Like, we can fight for you. We will go to war for you. And he's like, no, that's not the way this is going to be done. And yet he's like, and you're going to be the rock of my church, because he needs Peter's strength. Like, he knows what Peter's going to go through, starting the church and how much people are going to hate him. And he knows Peter has the strength, and he's the rock that can handle that. So he needs that certain strength of Peter. And he recognizes that, and he recognizes how this is the reason why you are going to be the rock of the church, because you are this strength. But at the same time, I have to get your heart right. And even though Peter's intentions were good and his heart was good, he was like, in a sense, Jesus had to transform him and change his heart, to reach out to Gentiles, to love everybody, to really get the reasoning of loving everybody. And that's the thing that he had to work on Peter. So I think Peter, in a sense, is so relatable.
Yeah, excellent point. I like when John talks about Jesus in Revelation. He says, I will come and knock on your door, and I will keep knocking. If you let me in, I will come and sup with you and stay as long as you want. And the corollary of that is that if you say, okay, I have better things to do, he will leave and he will still keep knocking at your door. That's what he does for Peter. I mean, that is a core idea of Jesus, and that is dramatized, shown beautifully in Peter. Folks, would love to hear what you think of all these three. Let's start with Gary.
I was just thinking of how Peter is like this, oftentimes misguided, but he's just the one that's overwhelming zeal. And there's something really comforting in that he makes mistakes the whole time, but Jesus never forsakes him. And I don't know about you, but I've throughout my life frequently done something thinking I was doing the right thing and then found out it was a disaster. And I'm just like, oh my, what did I do wrong? And so there's something really beautiful in the story of Peter throughout all the Gospels, is that he's constantly screwing it up. But he's also the one that, when Jesus says, "Who do people say that I am?" He's the one who knows, And so it's just this, this honoring Peter for that zeal, as misguided as it is, even though he's cutting off people's ears, even though he's just a whirlwind of injustice sometimes, even though he's like thick in the head and doesn't get what the whole foot washing is, even though he denies Jesus, like all of it, there's just like, it's a comfort to say, oh, okay, Jesus loves me too. Even if I don't see it, even if I screw it all up, Jesus isn't going to let me go away. And so that's one of the things that, especially as you guys were talking and I was reflecting on it, that's what stood out to me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Folks would love to hear from you now. You're welcome to talk about Mary, John, Peter, relationship between these two. Oh, by the way, this idea of kind of being under the cross and Mary, John, and Peter being under the cross is the idea of Balthasar and Adrian von Speyer. That entire way of thinking, it is a Johannine way of thinking. It is understanding, John, they understand John so deeply. And so that's, I learned it from them. Next up is Jeannie.
All right. I've noticed in myself that sometimes the very thing that I reject, I later embrace. And there's something about that, because when you say no to something, or when you just totally reject it, you hear yourself say that. And then, from there, you can sort of judge, what have I just said? Rather than, the things that are just sort of floating around that you're just thinking, but never actually say. I think it's different. So, and then the other part is that somehow that earlier rejection makes you embrace the thing you find true later more, more strongly, I think. I don't know, but I've noticed this a lot in myself as I went along. I wonder if anybody else has.
Yeah, no, folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. I think it's a very profound point. This is a point that Seneca was making yesterday. No, he was not here, but we were reading some of his letters. He's making the point that, will is about saying yes or no. Let me bring in another person. There is a guy called Robert Sapolsky, and one of his favorite quotes is, "Strong opinions weakly held." So to have, this zeal for whatever you understand, you spend all your time trying to understand what should be, and that you can see that in Peter, and he will say, "No, you shall not wash my feet." He has a very strong position there. And then when he realizes, then I will not have any part in Jesus, then he says, "Oh, wash my hands and my head too." So immediately it's like he will turn like this when he realizes that there is something wrong. And the fact that he said no to him before leads him to actually embrace, once he realizes that. So I think the idea of having these kind of clear ideas and then being willing to say, okay, I was wrong. And that is the idea of, metanoia. I like the word metanoia. I keep again and again going back to the Greek words, because metanoia is, you knew something, and then you knew something about it, around it, so you transformed that. Now that is translated as repent, which has a negative connotation, but metanoia has a connotation of saying I'm committed to truth. So if my ideas are, if I can go beyond my ideas to get to the truth, I will do that, and I will do that relentlessly. Thank you, Jeannie. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, one of the things that Jeannie brought out, when she was asking the question about, does anybody else relate to Peter, and like, realizing basically that, you've been wrong about something, and, having to go back, and the answer is yes. But I think one of the things that's admirable about Peter is he's unapologetically Peter. Uh, he acts, and sometimes he acts without thinking, and that gets him in trouble. But I think what Peter learned in his older age is that he learned to act with thinking, thinking about what is the best action. And I think that's the beauty of Peter, is that he grows into that. He grows into, let me think about it before I act. And I think that's when he becomes the rock of the church, is when he thinks with acting. And I think that's key too. And I think if you're comparing the three, Mary, Peter, and John, and I think, Mary being the beginning of the story of Jesus, I know, like, Jesus was always there, but being the beginning of the gospel and having the faith to say yes and acting, right? Without fully understanding what is going on. And then for John bringing in the understanding, but he also had to go through his own metanoia, his own transformation, from being the zealous, the overly ambitious one, to being the one that understands Jesus the best out of the disciples. I think it's clear in that, also in his writings, learning how to live for Jesus. And I think, John never took on a wife. John's life was dedicated to Jesus, which, that is just beautiful. And then Peter being the man of action, and, Jesus, like, think about it. Jesus came to Peter's home to heal his mother-in-law. That means he met his wife, likely kids. One of the things I think about all of these three is that when you look at them outside of Jesus, it brings a humanness to Jesus. We always focus on the divinity of Jesus, but there was this humanness of Jesus that all three of these people bring out. And if you focus on them, who they are as people, and who Jesus came into their lives to be, and how Jesus transformed their life, is great. And I just wanted to make another comment about Jeannie, when she talked about why Jesus didn't give Mary to her brother, to his brothers and sisters. Quite frankly, because his brothers and sisters didn't believe in Jesus as a divine Son of God. They thought he was a little crazy. And Jesus, and they didn't understand who Jesus was. There was a passage in one of the Gospels where it talks about, Mary comes to see Jesus, and he's like, your brothers and sisters out here that he will see you. And he says to Mary, who are my mothers, who are my brothers and sisters, those who believe that I am the Son of God. And I'm paraphrasing. And the reason why that's important is because at that moment, his brothers and sisters did not believe he was who he said he was. They thought he was crazy. And in a sense, Mary, even though Mary knew who Jesus was, she was, in a sense, influenced by them. Like, come on, stop this, stop this, revolution that's going to get you in trouble. They were in Rome. They were talking about crucifying him. They were trying to kind of talk sense into Jesus. So I think when Jesus was on that cross, she was giving him to his brother, John, because he knew John had the faith, and John knew who he was. and Mary standing there with him knew who Jesus was. And, so he wanted John to be the one. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Evanique. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to comment on anything. I'll just say one more thing about Mary. You can think of it as, she's the fertile soil for the seeds, in the parable of the seeds. She's the fertile soil. So the seed of God grows in her. And she provides the physical base for the seed to become the true vine. But the seed spiritually transforms her. So you have this interaction between spirit and matter. Matter, by the way, is the same word as mother. So it is Mary, and spirit is God. So this is the dance between the spirit and the matter, both transforming each other. So in a sense, in a very deep sense, mother doesn't become mother without her son or daughter. So it is the child which makes mother mother, just like the mother makes the child brings out the qualities, the motherly qualities in the mother. So there is this reciprocal relationship that is there. All right. Anybody else wants to comment on Mary, John, or Peter? Evanique, would you like to say anything more? Oh, wait a minute. Jeannie, go ahead. Go ahead and unmute first.
I know that in Dante, Mary is an intermediary, and I think this is all from the Catholic Church. So, for many people, they feel like if they're praying to Mary, it's going to get to Jesus somehow. And what is the basis of that kind of belief? Is she more accessible, or because she's a mother, because she's a woman? She can be an intermediary. Just your thoughts on that.
Sure. Evanique, can I go first? Okay. Again, I don't know. I know, like I was reading, I was planning this meetup on Mary, and then I was reading Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis says, there is one topic you should stay away from if you don't want to get into controversies, and that is Mary. Because there is just so much controversy about Mary. But so coming back, so again, I don't know. A large part of my reading currently is from Catholic scholars, and I'm adding people like C.S. Lewis, but I've read mostly, Romano Guardini, Balthasar, Adrian von Speyer, Lubbock, people like that. So that's my base. And so I'm speaking with that as a base. So the way I understand it is that, Mary epitomizes kind of human reaction to God. There is grace that is raining on you. And
Rika, you went on mute.
okay. All right. I muted myself. Okay. All right. So you have to start by saying yes to God. That's the start of everything. You're saying, it is simply saying it is to the I am. So you're saying yes to nature. Like if you want to understand nature, You have to start by saying yes to nature, whatever it is. So you're putting nature above you. You're understanding, standing under nature. You're also saying that nature is what is important, the universal principle, the universal spirit that runs through everything is what I want to focus on. And I'm going to give it priority over specific things around me. So I will focus on the Tao as opposed to 10,000 things. I will focus on Brahma as opposed to attachments to things. Now, Mary epitomizes that. And as a mother in love with her child, who loves her child, that kind of love is far more accessible to most people than the love between the Father and the Son before incarnation. But it is the same kind of love. So it allows people to move towards. So in that sense, she's the intermediary, that by being like Mary, by loving like Mary, you will learn to love like Jesus. So she is the intermediary between intermediaries, or messengers are also called angels. They are, and I think of her mostly as a saint, of somebody who really has a very good connection, human, who has a very good, deep connection with God. So it's like Saint John, and I would just call Saint Mary. Being characterized by having this deep connection to God. And like all saints, saints that speak to you will help you. They will end up being the intermediaries. Just like a good person, this is not really a religious point. Just like if you want to understand what it means to be a good person, actual good people around you are going to help you. And you're probably the people that you can relate to who are good is probably the shortest path. They're the middlemen. They are the intermediaries between virtue and you. So in that sense, and virtue, Jesus is virtue personified. He is the way. And he has tried to make himself as accessible to us as possible. But still, he's up there on the cross. And we can't match that. So it is better to start with something like John, or like Peter, or like Mary, to slowly climb up. Jeannie, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I
Go ahead.
can chime in too. I think you had a way better answer than I did about the intermediary. But I think from a Catholic perspective, is that Mary is seen as being the closest to Jesus that you can get. And so that's why she's used as an intermediary, and it's the mother, and it's also healing. So that's why so many people ask for prayers of healing from her. And it was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. But
sure. Let me add one more thing. Okay, so I don't want to kind of go past the controversy that Gary talked about. There is the Protestant approach is very different. So when I talk to many of my friends who come from very different backgrounds. Some of them are Protestants. So they say, okay, why focus on Mary? Because I think a lot of Protestant thought is kind of, has more kind of masculine character than the Catholic one. Catholic one is far more, it's an older one, firstly. It is like the medieval approach, which is carried on. And so it actually is very much like, in the tradition that we are studying of Taoism, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John, there is the female and male are integrated in a much more deeper way, and the back and forth between them is considered to be kind of natural part. You can see that in Tao Te Ching very clearly. This yin yang flow is considered to be how the Tao proceeds. And that is an older way of thinking. The modern way of thinking is far more analytical, far more sequential, logical, which is very much of a kind of a masculine way of thinking. And therefore, the virtue of saying yes, okay, is not regarded as a particular virtue. Say, what did you do? You just simply said yes. You didn't do anything. You just said yes. But that yes is a foundation. Now, I'm saying that the way in which it actually shows up in, it's just a question of emphasis of that yes is regarded as kind of a weakness. You're trying to say, okay, that's not doing much. But in that sense, but in a very fundamental sense, I'm very much kind of coming from it from the scribal age, as opposed to the print age. Print age is the one that you're reading like this. Scribal age is you're, interacting with things like this. You're talking as a embodied human being to other human beings about things that you care about. Your character is being shown, your emotions are being shown. All of it is connected to your life, and all the words exist in that entire context, a human context of emotions, of actions, of thought, of going towards God, all of that. So that is my understanding of the Protestant versus Catholic. I don't know whether it is particularly good. Again, I'm not a scholar, so would love to hear what others have to say. We're going to start with David, followed by Gary and Penny. David.
Yes, well, if I could have a go at answering what Jeannie was getting at, from a historical viewpoint, well, besides our tiny sect of Christians within Judaism, which is a fairly small kingdom, we've got the pagan trinities. Now, in the pagan trinities, of course, it's the Holy Family, the Father, the Mother, and the Son. The Mother, she's there in the pagan trinities. In Egypt, with its millions of people, perhaps that's an exaggeration, millions, Isis is the mother, Osiris the father, Horus the son. Isis represents the earth, etc., nature. Okay, then you've also got what the church deliberately doesn't mention, the Zoroastrian religion, which was from the Mediterranean, which had been the religion of the empires from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley, the Armenian and the Parthian empires. Look them up, history. It's there in the historical atlases, but, if you can get away from your church brainwashing and just look up the history, they had their trinity, Mazda the father, Anahita the mother, and Mithra the son. Now, they're all waiting for their Messiah. The Zoroastrians are waiting for their Messiah who would be, in one version, it's Mithra who's going to incarnate. And that's where some of the scholars think that the Christians picked up this story from, which we know as the three wise men from them. But anyway, that's all simply the point I'm making. So therefore, the vast area, right across all those continents is pagan trinities with the mother. Now, of course, the particular sect of Christians that the Roman emperors picked hate women, as we've been discussing. They downplay them. So they neutered the mother. So in the Christian Trinity, she becomes the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, neutered or male. Take your pick, but not female. So when the Christians crushed the Isis religion in 491, and they tried to get their followers, the Isis adherents into Christianity, they had to try and bring the mother back in, and they couldn't resurrect the original pagan trinities, the Father, the Mother, and the Son, the Holy Family, in other words. So hence we get our cult of Mary, starting when Isis gets crushed by Christians and they bring her concepts into Christianity. So they're offering Mary, therefore, as Mother of God.
Wonderful.
Anyway, that's enough from me, but that's
That
the
was-
historical viewpoint.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate that. So I have a couple of comments on it, but I'm going to have Gary and Penny go next. I mean, it's really fascinating because this Trinity, it's a very powerful concept, and this mother, father, and child is a very deep way of understanding it. It allows you to actually see what the interaction is like. So I would like to build a little bit on that, but let's go with Gary, followed by Penny first. Gary.
I was actually kind of just thinking about what you were saying earlier, Srikant, about the scholastic or the scribal approach versus the analytical approach. And since you're already reading C.S. Lewis, all I really wanted to ask you or mention was towards the end of his career, one of the last books he wrote was a retelling of the story of Cupid and Psyche called Till We Have Faces. And women play prominently throughout that entire story. It's written from the perspective of a female protagonist. And his whole purpose is to blend those two types of thought that you're talking about. And as Lewis graduated, proceeded on there, he started to talk about how the mystical is inseparable from the analytical, and that by themselves they're both empty, and that's the point that he's getting at. And so he picks this beloved story of Cupid and Psyche and retells it in a different perspective. And so I just finished reading it, and so hearing you talk about, of course, when you read anything, suddenly everybody seems to be commenting on this thing that's in your head. Everything relates to everything. And so that's kind of like, if you're into C.S. Lewis, his thought on women and mysticism evolves over time. And so being later in his corpus, this book is really, it's kind of significant there. And of course, there's this, it's a controversy, to talk about Mary and whatnot. And that's probably what I like about it, is that it's written like as a first person from a female point of view, and none of the women in his story fulfill our typical tropes. They're not beautiful heroines that are in distress. They're all fully empowered, very, very different from what we would expect, especially his career as being a romance, Renaissance and those kinds of romance where women have these, archetypal damsel in distress types roles. It's like he consciously gives his characters not that.
Wow.
And so I'm just throwing that out there as just kind of like something to reflect on. I like that he adapted that.
Wonderful. Gary, thank you. So I also want to recommend something to you, because, it's like I'm there is just this subject is so deep and just so much to explore here. So Gary, the thing I want to recommend to you is a very short work. It's only the first 3 chapters, the preface and first 3 chapters of Origen's Principles. Okay, it's very, very short. It is, so you just read the preface, you read the chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. It's actually a very long book. Okay, it's called Principles or First Principles by Origen. Written, he's like 185 80, 250 80. It is the best presentation on the Trinity I've ever seen. And there is nothing even close to that. There is a beautiful reading of it available on YouTube. And you can just search for Origen Principles and you'll see they've read, he's read only 4 chapters of, I think it's a 700-page book, but this is only the first like 70 pages, 80 pages. It's the most profound writing about the Trinity. I want to recommend that, and I'm going to go to Penny, and then I want to talk about the Trinity and the idea of father, mother, and child. Go ahead, Penny. Oh, just a second. You can't unmute. Hold on. What did I do? My fault. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, I was raised a Protestant, and one of the distinctions that was emphasized was that for the Catholics, the church was necessary as an intermediary between the individual and God. Church was the necessary intermediary. And that the Protestants did not believe that the church needed to be there as an intermediary. Each individual was able to establish a direct relationship with God and did not need the church as an intermediary. And so, as we've talked about Mary, if you don't even need the church as an intermediary, you certainly don't need Mary to be an intermediary between you and God. That was just one of the things that, was kind of emphasized as the background of the Protestant church.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about all these controversial topics that I don't really understand well. Okay, so firstly, I want to talk about the father, mother, and child. Okay, and see the profoundness of this idea and see how it actually shows up in the Gospels. Mother is just matter. It is the world. God so loved the world. So God is the spirit. He's the father. And world is the mother. And Mary is basically the world. She's also the church. So church here is simply not the Catholic Church, but this is a community of people who are all focused on God, who have the spirit of love in them, who have the spirit of truth in them, who are all focused on truth. And because they are all focused on truth, regardless of who they are and where they come from, what language they speak, there is a commonality with them. And that spirit of truth is nothing but the Holy Spirit. So that is something in them that we can all have. We don't have it most of the time, but we can have. That's a potential that is available to us. So that's the mother and that's the father. There is the world and there is the spirit. Spirit is, it is like, Holy Spirit is like, the way in which the Indian thought talks about it is Atma and Brahma. Atma is the spirit in you. Brahma is spirit animating the whole world. So you have a little bit of God in you from which you can act. Okay, but that is God in you. So that is the, that's the spirit on earth. Okay, so that's the mother, the word, and the spirit. So now the hardest part is the child. Okay, what is a child? Okay, now don't think of a physical child. Okay, Jesus is the child. And he's a child in so many different ways. He's the word that is the beginnings of everything. He's the one who is going to have everything that you had as the afterbirth and is going to be born. He's the creative power in you. He uses the old man, which is the current condition of the world, the cross, in order to move towards the spirit at that point. And thereby create something new. He's the child and he's the father at the same time. He's the guide for you. He's the way. Yet he's your child. He's your child and your father at the same time. He's your father as a guide. He's your child because by trying to be like him, you are recreating yourself. And it is a combination of the world, what you are, and the spirit of truth. So you're continuously, this is a process. It is eternal process. This is what is talked about when John talks about eternal life, that eternal life. So he says, and that is eternal life, that you know God. No means they're saying experience God. So when you're experiencing truth, when you're experiencing truth, when you're focused on truth, that is what is going to transform you. And the word is the means of doing that. See, truth is very hard to grasp. God is not accessible to you directly. And you need intermediaries. And the child of God, the Son of God, is the intermediary between you. And so I see this entire structure. So this is how I understand it. So would love to hear any comments. Next up is going to be Katie, followed by Sean. Katie.
I think I'm enjoying getting into the reading of the Bible itself, because when they say God created the world, they refer to God as Elohim, which is it's a plural word. And I spent a long time trying to figure out what was the root of it. And it's very confusing what's the root of it. But there is a female, there's potentially like a male and a female, or kind of like an ambiguous meaning, which then if you read later editions, it says Elohim is. So in Hebrew, it's plural. So that's something that got, transformed as we later have kind of reinterpreted it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. My understanding of Old Testament is very, very poor. So I don't know if somebody else wants to, if Gary, if you want to comment on it, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, we can go ahead. So any other comments? So this, the idea of the child, I think, is a truly kind of amazing thing, in some ways, there are, and this is a point that was made by Jacob Branowski. He says there are cultures which make idols of adults, and they point, he talks about the Easter Island. He says, look, all those faces, you know, the child is shown that. That's how you have to become, that's the ideal. So it is fixed. With Jesus, it is the son, it is the child, which is the ideal. That is a creative capacity which brings together both the father and the mother, both the masculine and feminine, in order to produce something new that did not exist. It is idea of being born again. It is the idea of Renaissance. It is the idea, that's what it is about. All right. Anybody else has any comments? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Evanik, would you like to say anything?
I wanted to thank everybody for coming, and I really think that I'm going to have to like study Peter. So maybe in the next few weeks, I could do another one of these with your permission, Shrikant, to
Absolutely.
do a deeper study on Peter and a deeper study on Mary as people. I know I did Mary in the Divine Feminine, and so I just want to discover her as a person, as a woman, and and discover Peter as a disciple, because I had a new appreciation. And thank you, Shrikant, for giving me the platform to do this, because I've learned so much from doing this, and it just made me want to go deeper. And so thank you for that. Thank you for your thoughts, and thank you for like sparking the interest for me in this topic, because it was through talking to you that I had an interest in looking at these three figures. So thank you.
Wonderful. I just want to make one last comment here. I mean, this is, I don't know who it is that said, I think this was either Balthazar or Lubbock. He says, look, if we are all children of God, then the truth is spread throughout the world, throughout cultures, across time. And what really matters is that, are you following the truth or not? Not whether you have a particular way of thinking about it. And you have to be open to truth wherever it is found and interact with it. So one of the real powers of people like Carl Jung, who look at patterns across culture and use that as a foundation, actually you understand the human condition, you understand the truth better, because you're leveraging truth wherever it may be found. And it gives you understanding which is far more richer. All right. Thank you, everybody. This was so delightful, and thank you, Evanik, for bringing this up. Dee, you wanted to say something?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to take 2 seconds to express genuine thankfulness and gratitude to both of you for putting this together. I have been finding lately that it is very, very, very difficult to find people to discuss the Bible with in the way that you're doing it in everyday life in the hustle and bustle of New York City. It sometimes feels very isolating as a Christian myself to be able to find people that, just the way that you guys covered it. I just really appreciate it. Like, this was very, this was really good for me spiritually. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dee. It's absolutely true, because what happens is that it's like, things get too much focus. So another thing is that, I'm very deeply Protestant in the sense that I think you have to have a direct connection to God. You have to focus on the direct connection to God. And that's really, that's part of my Indian tradition, of saying that, God is there and you are there. Why do you need intermediaries? You do need angels. Okay. You do need saints. You need people who will help you, who will show you. It's not about that they are between you. It is they are by your side, who are a little bit further towards God. And when you have that, and the beautiful thing I like about these conversations here is that, each person is actually speaking from, speaking their truth. They are understanding whatever they understand, and they are very directly and very simply putting it on the table. And there is just, these topics, this is a very deep topic. And, the more I look at it, the more I understand how little I know and how little most people know. And you need to have a level of humility and level of openness. On one hand, it is very rare, but on the other hand, it is there everywhere. So if you're actually open to it, you see this kind of Spirit of God in people all around you, regardless of whether they are religious or not. And the same thing that Jesus was complaining about the Pharisees of focusing on ritual rather than spirit, and not being able to even see God when he's standing right in front of you. I think that is very much true of most religions, of most of the times, most people in most religions. So I love what we are doing here, and I'm just delighted to have so many people from so many different backgrounds, come and talk about it. And special thanks to Evanique for instigating this. And if anybody wants to do anything on these topics, just let me know. I would love to build on that. All right, and thank you, Gary. Glad that you could make it. And see you folks soon. Bye, everybody. Bye.